Thank you very much, David, for joining us on our podcast at CREATANT. And this
Thank
time
you.
we want to share basically your story as a musician, but also as an entrepreneur. And while doing this, I also want to thank to Kyoko because she was bringing us together. And then you shared your life story with me, and it was something what was stuck at the time with me. And I was thinking about what you went through when you were a child, and you had eye cancer when you were 2 years old, and you had a very tough time, but you survived it. And then you found your passion for music, and you started playing drums. And how was your story as a kid when you, how did you find your passion for music?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me today. It's great to see you. Thank you, Cyril. Thank you, Saref. And it's great to see everyone. Really, I don't ever remember a time in my life not having drumming in music. And, going through the cancer, it's retinoblastoma was the cancer, which is cancer of the eye. And typically only one of three things occurs as an outcome from that type of cancer. Either you're fully blind and you lose both of your eyes, you die and the cancer spreads, or the third option is that you lose one eye. And that's what happened in my case, my right eye. And it's been, of course it was life changing and it was life altering as a child. And music was a place of refuge. And that's really how it started. As far as my memory that I have is that it really was like a way to just kind of zone out into something that always connected with me and always was inside of my heart, to just the love of music. And probably drumming because I was I was introverted in socially, but I had a lot of energy inside of me. And I think drumming really spoke to that. And I love the visual. I always thought that, don't ask me why. It's a very individual feeling that I think each of us, has towards, music and instruments and just anything we're passionate about. But the drum set on the stage, the visual of it, just whether it was a small drum set or a large drum set or whatever it was, just everything about it just spoke to me and was just very connected. So I was always drawn to the drums, and both as an instrument and musically. So, that's how it really started.
I saw on your website where you basically have a big drum and you're a little kid and the
Yeah.
drum is a little so what is the story about this photo? Did you break it? What happened there?
Well, that's great that you found that photo. I'll just share with you that originally, for years and years, people would ask me, when did you start playing the drums? And my memory for, probably the first 20 years of my career was that I started playing the drums at 8. And there's a photo of my playing a drum set, which was the first drum set I ever had. My parents surprised me with it. It was a used kit they found somewhere because we really didn't have any means. We grew up very, very modest. And so a drum set was a big deal. Even a used, inexpensive one was huge. So, because I was playing on tabletops and just, surfaces that were basically free. So all I had was a pair of sticks. And so it was something that was the moment that it started. But in fact, I found the photo that you're referring to 15, 20 years after I was telling that story. And then I realized I was able to ask family members, what is this? And it turns out that I started playing when I was 2. And I got a toy drum set with paper drum heads. And of course, as soon as you hit them long enough and hard enough, they tear, and that's kind of the end of it. And so I beat the heck out of that drum set, apparently I think I had it before I was in the hospital, and then I had it after, because my life, as short as those 2 years were, my life was, kind of in many chapters, but the early story was that, there was before having eye cancer and going to the hospital for a prolonged period of time and that was a lot of trauma. It was a lot of fear. I mean, that was scary as hell. I'll never forget, the gas mask, because then they used gas masks. It looked like Darth Vader, coming towards my face, which was the last time I ever saw her out of 2 eyes. And so, it's kind of, that was one moment. And then everything after that unfolded. So I didn't realize my parents had got me this drum set while I was suffering before I went in the hospital. And then I had it after. And then the picture you're referring to is after I got out of the hospital. I had finally beat the living daylights out of it, and I was crawling through the drum head that I had just destroyed. And it's a pretty heartfelt memory. You know, it's amazing that that photo was, you know, like a Polaroid or whatever, right? Because we're in 1969 in that photo. It was, yeah, it was very special.
Question, David. When you were, so for example, when you were also young and you were start playing with your drums, did you feel like you have a specific rhythm already, or how did you get the passion for the drums?
It's a great question because I started on a practice pad. So I had sticks and a little pad. And I also was playing piano. My parents were very insistent that if I was going to have anything to do with music, I had to do it what they considered the right way, quote unquote. And that meant reading music and understanding music from a musical standpoint, because drums are rhythm instruments, right? By and large, you know, you're learning rhythms and beats, etc. Whereas piano, you're actually playing the melody, the chord. It's the music part of the composition. The rhythm typically accompanies. So they wanted me to have a music background, music theory, and so I started playing piano, and I started reading music with their encouragement, and I got lessons at school. Back then, the school actually would give you free lessons, right? Because they were part of your school curriculum. If you signed up for it, they would let you take the lesson. So I learned to read music at that age, 7, 8 years old, and started playing the piano. Did not really like the piano, did not follow it, but I learned enough that I understood and had learned the music side of it, the notes and time signatures and key signatures, etc. And then I really started pursuing the drums and realized, because I wasn't using my feet, there wasn't four-way independence at that point because I wasn't on a drum set. I did have a natural feel towards being able to play, you know, just rhythms with my hands and the different exercises that they'd given me. And I liked it. And I would go home and I would play the records. I don't know if anybody remembers phone books, because they're, you know, they're as ancient as the dinosaurs at this point, but we used to have phone books, and they were very thick, and they would deliver them to the house, just drop them off at your doorstep. So we had a whole stack of them, and I would set those up. And that was my big drum set that I would envision like I was Neil Peart or Keith Moon or one of these famous drummers that had this incredible drum set. And so my parents, to further encourage me and kind of see how much this was really sticking, you know, was it a fad that a kid's going through, as we all do as kids? You know, we kind of cycle through things until we land on something. They weren't sure if it was that or if it was something that I was really serious about. So they signed me up for drum set lessons but I didn't have a drum set. So I would practice on the phone books and then go back and play the lesson every Saturday or every other Saturday, whatever it was at the time. And I did that for over a year. And then they realized, okay, he's actually progressing and he's actually taking this seriously. He's practicing. And they asked the drum teacher, but Mr. Woolley, I mean, I don't know how I randomly remember some of these things from my childhood. It's kind of bizarre because a lot of it I don't. But I do remember Mr. Woolley, and he gave me these lessons at Lexington Music Center. And we were in the back room in this, you know, where they had a little drum set. And I would practice. He would teach me things, and I would practice, come back, improve. This kept up for over a year. And so then they surprised me with my own actual Pink Champagne Rogers drum set that they bought from some friend of a friend of a friend. And then that's where it all started for real. That's kind of like the next chapter beginning, because now I can actually play with other musicians and I can start really playing the drums because I'm not on phone books anymore. And that was a significant turning point.
You mentioned something very important, David. So because I have friends, for example, the parents are not so supportive, and they're also questioning, you know, the artistic path. You know, it could be music, could be, why are you a painter? Is this even a job? But your parents were actually very supportive of you. So your dad was, for example, I was reading it. So he was a World War veteran. Your mom was a legal secretary, and you were very young and coming into the music direction, and they supported you. And I'm not sure if they saw also the talent already, but I saw you started going almost professional in that direction at a very young age.
That's right. They were incredibly supportive. It was an interesting dynamic because 110% they were supportive, and they are the reason that I can be where I am today. I don't see a path where everything evolved, even though I did all the work and I took the steps, etc. All those early years were them being there and their support. which I don't see how it plays out in my life with had that not been the case. So the support parents give to their children is so crucial. I didn't realize it, right? You only know what you see and what you live as a kid. And my environment, I didn't realize how special it was at the time, was an environment of just nonstop nurturing, love, support. And there was no financial support in the sense that we didn't have anything to support. So it wasn't like they could just go out and buy whatever. It was like, it was love and encouragement and direction and guidance. And of course, they did everything they could with the means we had. They did buy me a drum set. We did have a house that we rented the first floor out to a tenant so we could live on the second floor, and had a basement, and we split the basement in half. The tenant got one half, we got the other. And the half I was on, my parents allowed me to put my drum set there and have other musicians come by at a very young age. So these are huge, huge signs of love and support. The other side to it, though, that I'm referring to is that they also hated the music business. So they supported my passion. They supported everything that I wanted to do, but they also were very much cautioning, like, please, whatever you do, don't go in the music business. Go into a business that's just has a much different lifestyle. So they knew all of it from all angles, and they didn't have anything to do with the music business. So they were basing that just on historically how they saw a lot of things play out. I mean, the music business is a very tough business. Its history is rife with, derelicts and drug use and late nights and traveling, in a different city every night for years. I mean, it definitely has a side to it in some lanes, especially, that's not conducive to a lot of people's way of living. So it can be very challenging. It can bring out other things that are not good for your life. And they could see that. And because, as you mentioned, I was playing in clubs at a young age, which again was there supporting these things that I look back and I don't even understand how they let me do some of these things. But the flip side of it was that they trusted me and I earned that trust. I've never done a drug in my life, never tried one. This is for sure the truth I'm saying. This isn't just a soapbox. Never tried a drug, never smoked a cigarette, never drank alcohol. So even though as a very, very young kid, we're 11, 12 years old, and I'm playing in clubs and I'm around people twice my age, and there's people smoking everywhere, drinking, of course, nonstop because you're in clubs, and in some cases using drugs. And it turned me off so badly. So they're telling me on one side, don't smoke, do drugs, or drink. And then I'm experiencing firsthand what that really looks like if I did choose to do any of those things. And I was repulsed by it. So that combination kept me clean my entire life. I never even had an inclination for it for whatever reason, because I think some of it's chemical. I think some people that get into that or go down that path, there's something inside of them that draws them to that. I just was never drawn to it, maybe because they were programming my brain so early, like that this is bad. So I just got turned off immediately. So it really was an interesting kind of tale of two approaches, where on the one hand, it's like, don't swim in the deep end, you might drown. On the other hand, they let me jump in the deep end, but kept me, with a life preserver. And so here I am in the clubs, I'm in the music business. And I think part of them thought the more he gets in this, the more he's going to hate it. And they were right about that. But what ended up happening was that as I get into my teens, I loved music and I loved the doing part of it, the creating part of it. And yes, I hated the lifestyle. For me personally, it just wasn't something that I saw myself doing for the rest of my life, one-nighters and those kinds of things, which there's nothing wrong with. And so many of my collaborators, that's their life and they love it. I just didn't like it. And so what I found, technology. And at first, technology was something that I was very naturally passionate towards. But what ended up happening very quickly is I realized, wait a second, this is all the contribution I had as a drummer, and even more creation, more possibility, more kind of endless pursuit of knowledge and how to contribute and evolve. Yet it doesn't require playing in smoky clubs. And so it was like, and I don't have to worry that the guitar player is going to run off with the singer and I'm not going to have a band anymore after we just spent 3 years of our life sacrificing to get somewhere. So all of these things that I learned at a very young age that I didn't like and I didn't feel good about were all being resolved towards technology at first, that was like one of the things that appealed to me the most. And then, of course, it just turns out that that was my calling, you know. And by the time I was 18, 19 years old, even though I was still playing the drums a lot, I was kind of cross-fading from one to the other. That occurred in my late teens, where I finally, by my early 20s, was not playing the drums full time anymore and was not pursuing that and was full on into technology. And I had already by then worked with some great artists and got the gig with Aerosmith, where I became their in-house engineer and technologist, and things were really taking off. So it was, you know, that's what I'm here to do. You know, it's here for, my calling is music, technology, and this hybrid of all of these different lanes that have all converged because I'm passionate about them. And they start at this very young age that you're referring to.
So you were basically in the best times of music. If we think about the 70s, 80s, and 90s, what can I believe is, so I was listening to all this music at the time, and they got like golden and platinum albums all the time. And you are actually the guy who was helping them to make this music even sound much better. But the thing is that you also started very early. So you said like you started like with 12 years old already in the clubs, and with 16 you started already consulting other people how, you know, on a music side, like, because I think MIDI came out at that time. How did you figure out the technical side? You learn and teach yourself because there is no instruction who should teach you all this technology. It was just evolving. So how did you come into this direction? You mentioned Aerosmith. If you tell the story how you um, got them as clients, for example, would be very interesting to know.
Well, it did start with MIDI. That's right. For me, in my teens, I was, as a drummer, it really initially started where I was trying to understand technology as it was applied towards drumming. That was step one. And really at the very, very beginning, I wasn't thinking in any terms of how my career was going to unfold. I was really just looking to expand my vocabulary as a drummer. And now we're in like 1984, 85, you know, somewhere around there. And so MIDI is just really coming onto the scene, and the hybrid use of electronics and acoustic drums was just beginning, and I was fascinated by it. I knew nothing about it. So I jumped into it and started learning, and that's where it started. That's what lit the fuse, as the saying goes. And then I realized, wow, I'm doing this to learn how to make my drum set sound better and how to have more tools and more colors and sounds available. But I actually enjoy that as much as I enjoy playing. This is kind of strange. Like, I didn't understand it because it was my first experience with it. And I just dove in. And then I realized I had a natural understanding. For some reason, I was able to just understand it so quickly and naturally. I wouldn't even have to read the manuals in a lot of cases, and I could just go right in and start using everything. And then after you use a couple of pieces, you start to see the commonalities among all the rest of the pieces, and then that speeds up the process even more. And I was into music technology so early in what we now know as the music technology journey since the 80s, that people would say to me, why would anybody care about technology? I mean, it's such a bizarre thing to say now, right? But that was what they would say then. That's how early I was into it. And as you mentioned, I started consulting, and I went to a Boston music based, I'm from Boston, so this is all happening in Boston. And I went to the number one musical chain, which was EU Wurlitzer. They had like 5 or 6 stores around New England. At first, I would go there as a client, and I would spend all my time in the drum and keyboard departments learning the equipment, because it was all there, right? So you could just, that was like the library of technology, is that they had everything on display. And I got to know the people working there, and I got to know the general manager, and he's still to this day a dear friend of mine. His name's Gene Jolly. He's recently retired, but he really gave me my first big break, because I went to him and I said, Gene, I've learned all this equipment, and I want to start a consulting business, and I want to ask if you would refer me through your store network to potential clients. And he said, well, make a sign, get some business cards, and I'll see what I can do. So I made a beautiful laminated sign, which I still have to this day. And I made several of them, and I made it as a stand-up so you could put it on the counter of the music store around the stores. And then I put a little business card holder at the bottom, and I got a phone number, 1-800-345-MIDI. And so it was easy to remember. And so I went back to him and I showed him my concept. And he said, wow, because I'm like 19 at this point, 18, 19. And he said, I'm impressed. He said, all right, well, I'll get behind you. And so he let me put it at all the stores. I drove to each store. I mean, I was so young. I think my dad came with me. And so we went to the stores and I introduced myself to all the different store employees and whatnot, asked them if they would please just let it stay on the counter, and Gene had approved it and all that. And people started calling me. And I started my consulting business in earnest, and it really started to take off. The incredible thing was I was not only making a great living, I was learning so much because everybody's setup that called me to help them was different. So I was literally learning every piece of equipment that was out there, because it was everything from somebody just bought one keyboard and they didn't know how to use it, all the way up to like full systems with sequencers and computers and synchronization and just very, very complicated setups. So it was the whole gamut. And I never read a manual. I would literally just go in and I knew how to use everything just right off, just walking in. So here I was going into, in hindsight, it was kind of crazy how it unfolded, but I never had a client that wasn't happy. I never had a client that said, oh, I know more than you do. What are you doing teaching me? They all were blown away because I was able to just naturally find my way around the menus and around the structure and the systems. And then it was strange how the more I would push the buttons and kind of see the interface within like 15 minutes of every piece of gear, I kind of knew it and kind of understood it and was able to then, really consolidate what the person I was teaching needed to know. And so that they didn't have to go through the same complexities, that they could just say, all right, here's what I needed to do. And back then everything was just, write it down. I mean, people barely had printers, never, there was no internet, of course. So they would write down the instructions. Voice recording was, a Walkman, if that. So it was really, really prehistoric in what was available for the educational side of it, but I was able to show them in a way that they could take away what they needed to know. And then that taught me, how to learn this equipment even faster. So then I was able to then go to artists who wanted to use this equipment. And that's how the record side of it and the touring side of it, in terms of, I never was a touring person. I was always kind of high level. I'll set it up and then you guys take it on tour, because I didn't want to go back to that, what I remembered from my youth of sleeping in vans and driving around and playing one-nighters and all of that. I didn't ever want to do that. So I wanted to really focus on a high-level approach to things and contributed a much, much more significant impact than what I thought the other side of it would be. So I was really focused on that. And that's how it evolved.
Yeah, because in 1988, at just 18, you create one of the first ever drum loop sample libraries with East-West. You saw this
Yes.
gap in the market for new sounds. What gave you the confidence to not just have the idea, but to actually create the product and sell it to the world?
Well, thank you. I think it was around 90. I think it was a little later, but by then I had already started working with Aerosmith. Saref mentioned that. I'll tell you that story because I know you wanted to hear that. That's kind of an interesting one. And it really directly comes from you, Wurlitzer. But I was always really, Cyril, the fact is that I was always looking to expand and evolve. That was really the foundation of it. Is every single milestone, if you want to call it that. So like understanding drum programming, understanding drum sounds, understanding drum sampling. Those are all different disciplines. They all require different skill sets and understandings, even though they're related. Each one you could spend your life on. So as I'm going towards and through these things, I'm then looking for the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, because I want to just keep getting better and better and better. So I was just learning every day. So it was natural to get to a point where I had amassed this whole library and I could see the drum loop world beginning, drum samples, libraries were super early days. There were just a handful of libraries available anywhere. And then the only way to get them was on CD. So that was where we were technologically, is you'd buy a CD, you'd put it in your CD player. Of course, there's only 99 tracks on a CD by the specifications. So within that, you could have like indexes, they're called, right? Where you can have sub audio besides the main track. But if you really wanted to keep it straightforward, you had 99 slots and that's where each one could be a loop, etc. So that was the delivery mechanism. And so within that, I thought, well, this is going to be big. This is going to be something people are really going to need. So I was passionate about it. Everything I've ever done and still do, I'm passionate about. That's been the common denominator. That's why when people say, what in the world does drum loop have to do with Aerosmith, have to do with Pro Tools, have to do with home automation, have to do with Atmos mixing, have to do with collecting and writing a book with Clint Eastwood, and like what are all those? None of these are so disparate. How in the world are they connected? And I said, they're connected because they're all something that I'm passionate about, and I'm the connector to it. And it all does kind of connect in other ways. But yeah, topically, they are all different, and maybe some of them relate, but for the most part, they're kind of uniquely, in my blender.
So I was reading a famous quote of yours. You are saying, I was building workflows before that was even a term in music, which is actually incredible. People think not everything was really established at that time. You were building basically methods and also whole music studios, where I can imagine how complicated it is, to put everything nicely together. And then it also shows you were thinking a little bit differently. You were also creating things that was not there before, and there's also, let's say, no similar solutions. So you need to figure it out basically. And what drove you, for example, to build this kind of entire systems, not just as using a gear, but also, that was basically in front of you building this kind of, very complex studios.
It was the natural evolution, as I was describing, always going next. That's where that evolved to. I mean, that's really a great point that you bring up about full studios is, if you think about the beginning is I have an acoustic drum set with no electronics. Then I'm looking to say, well, how do I learn about electronics and integrate them into this acoustic set? And if you start looking at every step, and then it goes to, acoustic and electronics, then it goes to more electronics, then it goes to, oh, well, if I have this full setup, how do I play it back? Well, I need speakers and I need a system. Well, if I want to play it, what if I want to record it? And then it just, every single answer is another question. And then that kind of evolves to just evolution. And so it got to the point where now it's a full blown MIDI, digital recording, playback studio. And I just wanted to learn everything I could about it and then share it with others and build a business around it. And I love doing things first. I think that first is a really, really important point, because that means you've innovated. That means you've been able to bring solutions to people before they even realized how much they need them. And then once you do that, then everything really takes flight, because now other people are seeing what you're doing and they're coming up with new ideas and derivatives. And then it just evolves from there. And then you get to another milestone even quicker, right? Because more people innovating, it gets us to another milestone quicker. So that's something that was always, first and foremost. And that's what you're referring to with full studios. So that became a business of mine that evolved. By the early 90s, I was building studios, and I'm credited with building the first what's called home studio. Again, who knows who was first with this or with that. I mean, it sounds great to say I was first with the sample libraries and first with the studios and first with Pro Tools and first with Pro Tools training. And that I might have actually been first with all of those things. Who knows? What's indisputable is I was very early, and I was definitely innovating and definitely pushing the boundary, because I was dealing directly with the manufacturers and the software developers. So I know how early I was, because they wrote the software, and I was communicating with them and working with them. And they were telling me, no one else is doing what you're doing. And so we've got to now change this feature set, or you need you to be more involved, at a very, very alpha and beta level, so we can start integrating some of these solutions that you need and that you're coming up with, and figure out how to program them, figure out how to, talk to the hardware through the software, et cetera, figure out how to expand capacity. So all of these things were evolving, MIDI being a great example. You have 16 MIDI channels, but that, you run at that time, even in the 80s with the setups I was doing and some of the projects I was innovating, 16 channels was not enough. So what would happen is they would build an interface, and I worked with them on this, that each port on the interface would be uniquely addressable. So now, instead of just having 16 channels across the board, now every port would be its own 16 channels. So instead of just saying, I'm broadcasting on channel 1 or channel 5, now we say I'm broadcasting on port 1, channel 3. So now you had 16 times as many ports as you had. So you could have you'd have 8 ports, now you have 128, and it just goes and expanded. So I was up to, 16 or 20 ports times 16. So now we've greatly expanded the capability of MIDI. And now, well, at the time with a Mac, you had 2 serial ports and they could be uniquely addressed. So now we could double that. So now we have 320 channels capable on one serial port. If we have 20 ports with the 16 channels each. And now let's double it and let's put another serial port. So we were expanding things very, very early, way before what the specification was capable of. And this was all, what I'm referring to when I'm saying how we're evolving it, how we're improving it for everyone, and coming up with these applications that would just allow whatever you could think of creatively, the technology could produce. Because inherently within the specifications, there were limitations when you really brought that into the studio. And that's where my musical background was significant in all of this, because everything that we were doing technologically was a result of a musical need. So I'm in the studio with whatever artist, we're working on projects, and then you hit the wall. Like, they want to do this, and they don't know what's going on technologically. They're creating. I'm responsible for the technology, but I'm sitting there going, wait a second, like behind the scenes, we've maxed out all the ports. We've maxed out all the channels. We maxed out all the polyphony, whatever it was. And I need a solution. And so I would work with the manufacturers and we would get these solutions. And I was always very much, I guess this comes from having the cancer as a kid. I was always very much like a now person. So it was like, I'm not interested in something taking 3 weeks or 3 months. Like, I always worked in seconds, minutes, and hours, and other people worked in weeks and months and years. So not only was about accomplishing it, but was how fast can we accomplish it? And I learned, without even realizing how I was perfecting this, I learned about scope containment, which became 2 words that were incredibly powerful and beneficial in my career. Because once I understood how to contain the scope, I could just get the feature set we needed immediately. Whereas a programmer would come back to me and go, well, we have to do this and that and that. And I would say, well, no. We have 2 days. You just described something that takes 2 months. And so I would figure out with them, I would extract the pieces that they could do in 2 days that were really what I needed. Now work on the other stuff. You have the other 2 months for the rest of the sprinkles. But, you add the salt and pepper. I need the steak, and I need it in 2 hours or 2 days or whatever it was. And that was another skill set I was developing, and I was bringing that to technology. So things were developing very rapidly and very powerfully because they were the things we needed in order to expand the tool set. Does that make sense?
Yes, I can clearly see how detail oriented you were, and you were innovating. You had to figure out things what was not there before. And as you said, I remember also this times a little bit. I did not have this kind of equipment. I had like 4 channels. I had an Amiga 4 channels, and also was playing around with the Star Trek while you were basically making professional music.
I remember the
You
Amiga, sure.
Yeah, a friend of mine, he's still DJ in Germany. He's definitely the more talented music composer. I also did a couple of things at the time. So you had a very so early breakthrough. You were able to get Aerosmith, one of the best bands in history, and their bassist, Tom Hamilton. So did you have like a moment of pressure, and and there was of course big opportunity. So now they trust you still very early, like beginning of your 20s. So what kind of situation was this at that moment?
Well, that story's rather incredible in hindsight. So EU Wurlitzer, back to that. Remember, I shared with you that they let me put my signs up and my MIDI consulting business was growing. Well, of all things in the world, Tom Hamilton, the bass player from Aerosmith, who to this day is still a dear friend, and of course I'm indebted to forever, because he picked up my business card, if you can believe that. He picked up my business card at EU Wurlitzer, and it's just so random. And he called me And I went, and unbeknownst, he did not call me and say I'm with Aerosmith or any of that. He just called me as another person. Remember, fortunately, I was getting a lot of phone calls, and everybody was, they were some level of musician, but a lot of doctors, lawyers, architects, they were people who had means and understood the value of education and consulting. So that, these are high level people that were calling me, and they were just calling one after the other. So I was very busy. And, John Smith, Tom Doe, Steve Saunders, whoever, and Tom Hamilton. But I was a huge Aerosmith fan. So when he said his name, I remember thinking, wow, wouldn't that be amazing if this was the same Tom Hamilton? But he didn't give me any indication of that. He just said, come to my house and, I have this setup and I need your help. Okay, great. That's what everybody says. So in this case, I went in, and as soon as he opens the door to his house, I know who he is, and I can't believe it. And he was just very down to earth and very nice. And we went to his setup, which he had in his basement. And of course, there's Aerosmith paraphernalia everywhere. So as a kid, it was really unbelievable, because I have to tell you, I've always been a huge fan of theirs. And as a very young, and they're a Boston-based band, right? So, in their hometown heroes. So on top of everything else, and I helped him out with his setup, and he called me back. I did it a few times, and then he was obviously very happy with the work that I was doing, and he called me up and he said, look, and this was out of the blue as well. He said, look, the band is we're in 1989. So this is the Pump album that's being worked on. He said, the band is starting to dabble in technology. And, we have a keyboard player now, a sideman that we've brought in to help us with some playback stuff. And, I'll invite you, if you'd like, I'll invite you to a rehearsal, and you can meet the guys and just see what happens. But it was very informal, and he was very clear, he was nice about it, but he was very clear, hey, we're not hiring you. You're not coming down because I just brought you, you got the gig with Aerosmith. I'm giving you basically an opportunity to just see how it goes. So if you'd like a shot, come in and give it a shot. And I did. I went in there, and my philosophy on time is that if you're not early, you're late. So I actually got to the rehearsal studio so early that the door was locked. Nobody was there. So I'm waiting outside the rehearsal, to your point, Saref, I'm nervous, of course. It's I'm so just overwhelmed almost. What do I don't have any idea what's going to happen, what they want. I mean, it was very vague. It was just kind of meet the band and see what happens. Well, what the heck does that mean? So I brought my sequencer. I had a Roland sequencer, standalone floppy disk, and I brought some gear, and I'm waiting outside the room, and one by one, the guy that opens the door shows up, then studio manager, I'm watching the whole thing unfold, and I make it into the waiting room, and then, this hours are going by, and then one band member at a time start to arrive. And of course, Steven Tyler's last, right? The star. But Joe Perry comes in before him, and I'm just kind of sitting there. And as they're walking by, they're just who the hell is this? And so of course, when Tom showed up, he's like, oh, okay. I started to get a little bit of guidance, okay, what am I doing? And then he introduced me, and I went, and Steven and Joe hadn't arrived yet. And I went into the rehearsal room and I set up. And then they arrive, and then they're starting to play, and I'm starting to hear Aerosmith songs. I mean, it's loud. It's just on the other side of the wall of where I'm sitting, and it's I can't believe it. Now my pounding, right? And I'm just wow, this is, and I have no idea what's going to happen. And then Steven Tyler pokes his head out half an hour in after they play a few tunes, and he didn't know my name. He didn't know who was out here. So he starts calling out just nicknames, and he goes, Swervo Gizmo, where are you? And I don't know what the hell he's talking about. And he goes, Gyro Gear Loose, where are you? He's picking all these names out of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang of the gadget guys. And then I realize he's looking for me. And I said, here. And he's like, yeah, you're the guy with the stuff set up, because I had everything set up. He goes, come in. And we come in, and I stand, and he goes, I want to try this part. And he starts playing what would turn out to be Janie's Got a Gun. And he starts playing the line, and he's playing it on a Korg M1 keyboard. And he's like, record me. And so that was it. I just hit record, I'm putting the sequence together. And he's like, I made a mistake. Go back 2 measures. And this is a sequencer with a keypad and a dial that turns. This isn't a computer. And so you have to know all the shortcuts and you have to know how to go back 2 measures very quickly. But I had used it so much that I could do it with one hand. So I could look at him and I understood music. So when he said, go back a measure, I knew what that meant. If he said, oh, we're going to do a key change here, we're going to change this, change the tempo, just it was like music and tech, because he's very musical, obviously, like understands a lot, not just an incredible iconic singer and songwriter, but he plays piano and he plays drums and he knows all of it. So it was just instant chemistry. And so we finished the song in like say it's a 4-minute song. We finished tracking the whole thing in like 6 minutes between stopping and punching in and playing back, quantizing. He's like, oh yeah, can you fix that? Yep, fixed. And so then we play it back and he looks at me and he's just like, okay, all right, cool. And I never left.
So, speaking of which, David, so you're in the room with Aerosmith. What was more intimidating, the legendary rock stars or the legendary mess of technology you have to fix?
Well, what was key to the whole thing, because it was all overwhelming and it was all like larger than life, because I'm not only in the room with Aerosmith and they're playing their instruments and it's just me and them. It was staying in the zone. That was the key. Like I learned by that time, because I had worked with other star musicians, I guess you could call it, by the time I met Aerosmith. And so I was able to get in the zone and just be myself, like just focus on what I do. I knew my role was to record what he wanted, edit it, play it back, and then go on to the next song and then embellish, overdub, add other sounds. Like all of that was what he needed. So I was able to take the nerves and turn them into creative energy. That was really the key. And that's just mindset, and I was just learning that at a very young age. And I still work on that. That's still like a very, very important skill set to develop. You've got to be able, in the most difficult moments, which these big opportunities and these big missions that we have in life, they require that, because they never stop. The more that you grow and the bigger the projects get and the bigger the value of the outcome is, the more you have to be in the zone.
So when you're talking like this, David, we were listening also to that music at the time. Now with your story, you're actually bringing us backstage.
My life told back is the fly on the wall to a lot of amazing moments and a lot of creative times and really, really colorful people. I mean, obviously people know the rock stars, the Steven Tylers and the Bryan Adams and the Ricky Martins of the world. They know them from their persona, from their music, their videos, their concerts. And I do too. I know them from that as well, and have had the privilege of being a part of their camp. And inside of it, the fly on the wall side is a lot of very unique moments. Besides the contribution, which is obviously the most important thing, is what kind of results can we achieve. But the process was unorthodox in most cases and very colorful.
So you became quickly the trusted guy. So they saw your capabilities, what you're able to do. They trusted your work. You were innovative, and in an era where it was basically everything new. So what do you learn at that time, when you were earning the trust of this, I would say, geniuses, like Steven Tyler or Joe Perry, when the stakes were very high?
What did I learn about trust?
Yeah.
I learned it was everything. It's everything. And I learned that I can always have to find a solution. That's what I learned. And I did. And I can sit here today with the three of us and everyone out there to say that I've had incredible setbacks and challenges and technological hurdles. This isn't some, fairy tale, everything's great story. But I can tell you as a fact that I've never had a technical solution I couldn't solve. And that's really been probably the greatest achievement of my career, because there's been some that, I really doubted at one point, like that it was solvable, but I didn't doubt it for long. And I would always, get out of my own way and just say, okay, there's always a solution. And there was. So I'm whatever the batting average is, it's 1,000% in this case for that. And that's, and it's probably the only place in my life that I could say it's 1,000%, but that's something I could measure and can measure. And I think that's where the trust was built from, is that I never said no or said that there wasn't a solution for it.
Can you tell us about that time? For example, it could be like Aerosmith or another early project. You have a moment where you almost went wrong and you had to pull a miracle out, very, very difficult situation, a doubtful situation, for example.
Yeah, there were more than I would have liked. I'll tell you this, that's for sure. Because the more you push the envelope, Craig Anderton used to always call it the bleeding edge, not the cutting edge. And so there's lots. I'll tell you one story that speaks to that with Aerosmith. Very early on, when you look at my career and you look at the first chapter of like major MIDI work, which is all of my work in my teens and very, very early 20s, I wasn't an audio engineer at that point. I loved audio, but I dabbled in the engineering side. I was 1,000% into the digital side, the MIDI and related technologies, which were, most of them were MIDI based, but digital audio was just starting to trickle in a little bit. Of course, it was already there in sampling, but the majority of it were all of these virtual technologies, we'll call it. And that's where I was just growing and growing and growing. And I wasn't even that interested in audio engineering at this time. I'm like 20 years old. I understood the complexity of it, and I'd worked with some amazing engineers. I'd obviously been around the studio at that point for a few years and had seen a lot, experienced a lot. And I respected it so much that I was like, oh, that's its own art form. And of course it is. And so I'm in the studio with Joe Perry, and we're working for a few months, and we're just going nonstop, and we're sequencing, and we're working in my lane, which was all digital audio. There's a little bit of engineering, but for the most part, we were working virtually. And I turned to him one day and I said, Joe, when is the engineer coming in? And he looked at me, he said, you are the engineer. And I said, I'm the engineer? I'm going to record all the tracks and I'm not just the MIDI guy? And he goes, no, you're everything, man. You're everything. And I said, well, I don't really feel qualified to be the engineer. I mean, that's like big, and I'm scared to death inside because I'm like, wait a second, this is a whole nother thing. And he goes, well, if you're not going to be the engineer, then you're fired. And I said, where are the microphones? And that was how I started.
Your ability to innovate is really, really remarkable. You push the boundaries and you show that under fire, you probably even innovate even more. You find really all the solutions. And then this lead to another music you have built. I was reading it from Steven Tyler. He was mentioning it. It's called the Starship Enterprise. Kind of studio was it that you have created for him that he said it feels like a spaceship. Can you
Well, we evolved. The studio for Steven evolved over the years. And I think every technological milestone that we evolved into, he would term the way that you're describing, because he's very passionate and he's very animated, as everybody knows. And so he would describe things, in that way, because it was a new, and that's what Steven was all about. I mean, he was really a huge inspiration to me on taking things to the next level, because Steven and I thought and think the same way, that everything you accomplish and you achieve is the basis for the next thing. So Steven is not a victory lap person, and I'm not either, really. Maybe to a detriment, I'm not, where, when something is accomplished, I don't sit there and revel in it for very long. I really just immediately get on to the next thing that's possible from what we just achieved. Even if it took, countless days, months, years, whatever, it just really is the setup for the next thing. So Steven was probably referring to any one of those studios. At its most evolved studio version of his, it would have been a Pro Tools HD-based system with a nice control surface and lots of plugins, and there was just a lot of digital capability. The tools had to catch up with Steven. When I said earlier, I've never said no, there is actually one exception to it that I always share as a story, because to me, it's just absolutely extraordinary. And it just shows me anything's possible, is that there was one time in my career that I said something wasn't possible. And of course, I've been proven wrong. But in 1989, Steven asked me, can we take a CD and unmix it? And I said, impossible, because I just thought where we were with digital audio back then was so archaic. I mean, 2 channels of digital audio was a big deal on a computer. Nonlinear editing with 2 channels was like flying to the moon in, 3 hours. That's how advanced it was. And I just didn't have the foresight. I was 20 years old and 21 or whatever. And I just was like, no. That's one thing that how would you unmix tracks that have already been put together and they just have 2 digital channels? Like, how would you then go in? And I didn't have the foresight at that time to see what now we can unmix. So the only time I actually said no, I should have said yes then. And I learned, these are the things that, in your 20s, you make so many mistakes and you do so many things that you wish you could do again. So I just always tried to learn from that.
Yeah, so Steven Tyler called your design a Starship enterprise. Brian Adams called you a whole of farmer for your tech brain. What was your secret? Always just making the gear so good that the artist could completely forget about it and just create?
Oh, for sure. It's all about the end result. It's all about, you could have this incredible technology set up and it could be as complicated as, as anyone can imagine or not even imagine. But all that really matters is how it works. And I think that's one of the things that made my home automation business so successful, is that in that business, which I got into in the mid 90s, in that business, there's a lot of mad scientists, right? There's a lot of people that have a lot of different skills and they have a vision and they go into these very large systems which require many levels of integration and control programmatically. And it's a software hardware world where all of the software you program speaks to hardware that then executes a function. And half of them or more didn't work. They were great because there were so many complexities to them. And there were a lot of firsts happening at that time. And for many years after, the guys would go in and they would just they would laud at the fact that they accomplished this. Like, we found a way to make the curtains open when the lights go on and the dock lights go up and the boat arrives and all of these like really complicated functions. And they were so proud that they even found a solution, but it didn't work reliably. So one time it would work, then one time it wouldn't, and one time half of it would work, but the other half wouldn't. And I just saw things completely different because I came from this mindset of, no matter how difficult the journey is, if the result is not 100% and reliable, consistent, and solid, then the journey's irrelevant. Even if you sacrifice tremendous amounts of time, money, and energy and life to get there, so you had to take yourself out of it. It's a very selfless journey. And if you're going to contribute, it's not about me. It's about what did I accomplish for the person or the people that this is meant for. And that would always be the North Star. And that was what I think, made me very successful in all of those endeavors, because they're all related in that the person who hires you or the audience that consumes your product, they are trusting, back to Saref's point, that they're going to get everything they asked for. And then I always like to give them more. I always like to promise one thing, but actually deliver more than that. And in delivering that, it has to be reliable. And I think in technology, there's a lot of mindsets that because someone's so smart or they work so hard, and it's true, they are that smart and they did work that hard. But because of that, you're lucky subconsciously, they're like, you're lucky you got what you got because look at what this took. I lost my family. I gave you 3 years of my life. I did all of these things and you can do these incredible things because of me. And all of that's true. But when the software has bugs or the project was not entirely successful, I don't subscribe to that. I go through the same issues I just described that we all go through, but I'm not satisfied until it actually works reliably and consistently. Then we've arrived. And that is a very different goal because that last 10%, 5% that gets it all dialed in and working is the hardest. And that's where you really have to be committed and you really have to be focused on what you want to deliver.
David, you remember I came back on a weekend. Basically, I had some meetings in Seoul, and then suddenly on my X feed, I saw a photo of Ozzy Osbourne. Basically, it was a very cool photo, but I looked quite artistic. But I was not thinking much about it. So, and then I was going through the comments because he's actually not posting photos like that. It was like some kind of legendary photo. And then, everybody was like sad. And I was thinking, what are they talking about? And then some people were writing, rest in peace. And then I went to the news because I could not believe, what are these people even talking about, And then I was really in a shock. Yeah, basically had already some health issues. You had an incredible relationship and also friendship to Ozzy Osbourne for a very long time.
Yeah, it was a little bit. It was 10 or 15 years.
Yes, you also sent me a video of him. What I also could not believe, because I think I missed that part where you were obviously in season 3 in the show of Ozzy Osbourne. And I can tell you, when I was in Germany, I was watching the Ozzy Osbourne show all the time. It was super entertaining. Especially what was also a little bit shocking for me is on stage is very crazy. He's biting off the head of a bat and everything, but at home he is such a family guy you would never expect, and such a nice family. Sharon, his wife, and the kids. Really loved that show. But I actually missed the first season, and then you basically sent me that video where I saw you basically, and then you looked so young. You still look very young. You actually did not change so much, and you're actually sitting there in the studio of Ozzy Osbourne.
Keith Moon.
I could
Yeah,
not
that I
believe it.
built.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about that time, when you started working with Ozzy Osbourne? How did it actually start with him?
Man, God bless Ozzy. Rest in peace, Ozzy. It's true. It's so sad. I was so shocked when that news came in. My son walked in my office and said, Ozzy just passed away. And I just, what? It was because, as you said, he was on stage 2-3 weeks earlier. It's just unbelievable. So his impact is going to last forever. And I was very blessed that I have that experience. It's really something. So I was working with a producer, songwriter named Mark Hudson. He wrote Living on the Edge for Aerosmith. That's when we first met in the early 90s, started working together. We became fast friends. I built a studio for Mark, multiple studios. He referred me to Ringo Starr. I was able to work with Ringo. And it was just incredible how, I was able to get referrals from these legends. And he said to me, look, I'm working with Ozzy, and Ozzy wants a studio, and I'm going to refer you to him, because I'm really happy with all the work that you've done. And so I was the height of the Osbournes TV show. I've never met Ozzy. I've never, I'm not connected to him in any way other than being a huge fan. I had seen him in concert. I was a huge Ozzy fan. I knew all his music inside and out, of course. And so I'm watching the Osbournes like you described. Like, I just think it's one of the best shows. It's so endearing. It's so funny. It's so insightful. You want to talk about fly on the wall. Like, I just thought that it was I remember where I was sitting in my little sitting room off the kitchen back then, and where I lived at the time, just watching the Osbournes on a tube TV, right? I didn't have a flat screen. Like, it was just so early days and so entertaining. And I loved it. I never missed an episode because I just thought it was so fascinating because I was such a huge Ozzy fan. So I understood the Osbournes, mania that was going on. I had no idea it was big. It was as big as it was, actually, because I was in my own world, like working with my clients, and I kind of have blinders on for the things that I'm really focused on. So I wasn't really clued into how massive it really was at the time. And so I got a phone call one day. I was sitting in an Italian restaurant, little pizza place, dive bar place, with some people that worked for me. We were having like a late night powwow meal, and I get a phone call, and the person says, "Could you hold for Mr. Osbourne, please?" And I'm like, "What did they say?" And all of a sudden, Ozzy gets on the phone, and it turns out he was on his jet flying to an Ozfest gig. And he said to me, "Can you build me a studio?" And it was very beautiful. Like, he's so warm and funny, and he was always just such a great guy. Always. I can't tell you one moment I had with him that wasn't beautiful and awesome. And I know that sounds, like too good to be true, or, everybody has this side and that side. And I'm sure he did, but he never showed it to me. All of my interactions were with Sharon, with the kids, Ozzie, were just awesome. They were just nothing but warm, professional, engaging, welcoming. I spent a lot of time at their home for years, and they were just nothing but the best hosts and clients you could ask for. And so when he called me on the plane that night, he was, if I did my Ozzie voice, I say this with all respect, of course, he's not with us, so I'm not trying to be funny, but this is really what it was like. He was saying to me, like, "Hey, can you build a studio for me?" And I was trying,
I
like,
can hear.
remember, on an airplane, it's very
Uh-huh.
loud. Even though it was a private plane, you hear like the jet, so it's hard to hear. And so
Uh-huh.
he's kind of mumbling and asking me, and there's loud jet noise, and I'm putting the phone up against my ear because I'm like, oh my God, I'm on the phone with Ozzie. Like, what is this? So he ends up saying to me, "Can you build a studio for me? And can you, how about I'll meet you tomorrow?" I was in South Florida where I'm based, and he's in LA, of course. And so his assistant gets back on the phone, and he says, "Can you be in LA tomorrow?" And so I said, "Yeah, I'll be there." So I moved my whole schedule. I book an early morning flight where I'll be in LA because it's 3 hours behind, right? So I gain 3 hours. So I literally, this is at 8 o'clock at night. At 11 a.m. LA time, I'm pulling up to the Osbournes gate, and the next day. And I can't believe it. And when I pull up to the gate, there's the house that I see on the show. Like, it's very surreal. And I was like, and there's hundreds of people outside. It's like a mob scene. Like, this is what I'm starting to instantly realize, that this is so massive. This is such a pop culture movement that this many people are waiting outside his gate, and they're brushed along. And then like another group of people come and the tour vans are driving by like every 5 seconds. There's the Osbournes house. I mean, it was really something. And then I get let in, right? Cause they're expecting me. So the gate opens and I get in, and everybody's taking pictures of me thinking this guy's got to be important. They just let him in. Like, nobody gets in, and they don't realize this is just a guy talking to Ozzie about building a studio for him. And so I met Ozzie for the first time that day. And between 8 o'clock that night and 11 o'clock in the morning, I got their approval to send an associate of mine, because I had an LA presence at that time. I had an associate that worked for me who was working on our projects there. And I got him approved to go to the house and lay out in the guest house where they wanted the studio a floor plan, because I wanted to go in there ready to go. I didn't just want to go and meet Ozzie and talk to him about it. I wanted to like get down to like, what does he want? So I sent a guy over there instantly. He went, this is like going around the clock, right? Because we don't have the tech then that we have now. So he goes there, he measures the rooms where Ozzie wants his studio. He puts it on a floor plan. He goes and prints it out. Actually sends me the file. I print it out on large paper so I can like put it on the floor and we can mark it up. And I go to meet him, and I go to the room where he wants the studio, and I roll out the plan, and he looks at me. He's like, "Is that why we're standing right now?" And I said, "Yeah, this is the room. This is it." He goes, he couldn't believe, like, "You have a floor plan of the studio already?" And I said, "Well, this is, let's build it out." And so we're drawing on it. It was great. So we figured out in an hour what he wanted: vocal booth, live room, drum room, warm-up room, like machine room. Like, we worked the whole thing out from just an empty guest house. I figured, we had it all laid out. So by the time we finished that meeting, I knew what he wanted, and now it's just a matter of figuring out, a little more specifics, which I had to do on myself and then present it back. And then we got going, and then I worked with him. That was in 2003. I worked with him, I want to say 10 to 15 years, because I know that's a wide range, but there were like 10 years in earnest where I built 2 studios for him, because the one I'm referring to on the Osbournes, he sold the house a few years later to Christina Aguilera, and then he moved to another house in Hidden Hills, and we did it again. We built another studio, totally different because it's a totally different house, but we did another beautiful studio for him. And then after he sold that house, he didn't want a studio anymore. He wanted to go to a studio. So my role with him really it just kind of dissipated. He was spending a lot more time in England. So I think that ended up maybe 12 or 13 years that process kind of unfolded. And then, they moved again, and that was the end of the collaboration. But there was no drama or story to it. It was really just what he needed from me kind of came to an end. And it was an amazing time. And there's so many stories. I mean, you can imagine between working with Ozzy and the Osbournes at the height of that show, ending up on a few episodes, as you mentioned, on season 3 and season 4. He had his ATV accident where he was driving the all-terrain vehicle in England and he almost broke his neck. He was very, very badly injured. They had to cancel a tour. A lot of things were happening, in this whole period.
Speaking of which, we have to ask about the famous Weather Channel incident on the Osbournes. He's losing his mind at the TV, and you are the guys who has to fix it. So tell us the real story behind that classic TV moment and how you earned the nickname the Rocket Man.
The Weather Channel story you're talking about? So what you're referring to, for those of you who watch the Osbournes or want to go back and relive this, is that the first 2 seasons, when they moved into the house, there was an AMX control system that was installed, and it really wasn't worked out in a lot of detail. And I don't know why I'm not blaming it on AMX. I'm not blaming it on the integrator. It's not, there's no finger pointing here, but the end result was that he had a touch panel, and the way it was programmed, and this kind of speaks to what I was referring to earlier about end results. The way it was programmed, you'd press on and the TV would go off, and then you press off and the TV would go on. Like, it would get out of sync, and then it would finally all synchronize, and then you would press the channel and it wouldn't work. So it would be stuck on whatever channel it was last on, which was the Weather Channel in some of the episodes. So Ozzy couldn't get off the Weather Channel because the control system wasn't communicating, right? Technologically, that was what was happening. But he was just like, what is this? Because he's not a technology guy, but he loves using it and getting the function of it. But he doesn't want to know about what's happening behind the scenes, and neither does Sharon. They just want it to do what it's supposed to do. So after I built the studio, and they were very happy, and we were working in the studio on some projects now, and I was there a lot, spending a lot of time together. We were talking about how the home systems were not reliable. So Sharon asked me if I could, fix them and improve them. So we did this first one we did was, because they were all separate systems throughout the house. So the first one we did was the little seating area that you see on the show right in the kitchen. And so that's where he was always stuck on the Weather Channel. So at the time, I put a Crestron system in, and there was the Crestron touch panels had a touch screen in the middle, but on the sides, they had 5 hard buttons on each side, and you could engrave the buttons. So I put a button in the bottom right-hand corner that said Ozzy, and I put a button in the bottom left-hand corner that said Sharon. And when you put either one, it did exactly what they always wanted it to do. Because 9 times out of 10, it was always the same channel, and everything was the same that they wanted, but the TV would be in whatever shape it was last left in. So, but when you pressed Ozzy, it did everything you wanted to. It went to the History Channel, et cetera, et cetera. So it worked great. I programmed it myself, and I knew it was bulletproof. And they did it on a segment. Actually, there's a show, I don't know what season, season 3 or 4, I don't remember, where we fixed it and just press Ozzy, and it always worked. And it never, ever, the gag became the opposite. Like, instead of always being stuck on the Weather Channel, he couldn't break the system, and he always got what he wanted to. And so we kind of resolved the Weather Channel episode that became so famous. And then it worked from then on until they sold the house.
Yeah, you not just built his music studio, you also helping him building his whole home automation at that time.
And home theater. Yeah, and he had a home theater. So it's kind of all the things that I did from an integration standpoint, all in one home. And that was typical that would happen with a lot of my clients. If they were recording studio clients, if they were people that were into music or musicians and producers themselves, and I built a studio, a lot of times it would transition into the home as well. And I would help them with their home theater, and I would help them with their automation system, and kind of have everything under one umbrella.
Ozzy Osbourne had just health issues. To see him on stage, for me, that was just incredible. And you remember, I was sending you some posts, I saw, on a concert was never expecting that he would even do it, but that when seeing him on stage and all his friends were there, I was just thinking, this guy is really a legend. He has all his health issues, but he's still giving concert to his fans. He really loves music. He can see the love to his fans and to his music. So I was very happy to see him basically on stage. Therefore, I could not believe it. And when I saw that photo, and I had to make sure in the news it is true or not. So I'm very happy. Even about the show, I had the chance to learn what kind of person he is, because if you just see him on the concerts and what kind of crazy stuff he's doing, you might say, oh, this guy's really crazy, but actually he's such an amazing person, and also the family. So this was very good at the times that I had the chance to.
Well, Saraf, think about it. How many people live to see their tribute? Very few, if any. A tribute is typically after someone passes away. There's a tribute to their life, career, and impact. Ozzy was a part of his. It's such a blessing, and I think it really speaks to just how incredible of a person that he was given that gift of being in his own tribute, and then passing away a few weeks later. It's just so profound and it's unbelievable. And I don't think there was any time that we would lose Ozzy that it wouldn't be considered too soon. Because he was that massive of an influence to every generation of music since 69, 70. I mean, that's virtually all of the history of rock. So it's really amazing. But for him to have lived through his own tribute and then we lost him, what a beautiful event for him to have experienced and to give in the world. He's blessed for that, and we're going to miss him forever.
His music will live with us, definitely. I think people will watch over again the Ozzy Osbourne genre, so I would like to watch it again, actually. Especially also
it's
season
really
3.
Fascinating, right? Yeah, season 3 you'll see me. Season 4 you might see me, but the show is it's timeless, right? Like I go back and watch certain episodes too. My wife and I'll watch the episodes, and they're just so engaging. Like you just keep wanting to watch it because you relate to it. All of us relate to it. Of course, most people won't relate to what it's like to live as a rock star, but that show isn't about that. That show is, what is it like to live as a family man with kids that have all the same challenges other kids have, plus a wife that's managing a career and a household and raising children, teenage kids at the time, working through whatever challenges they have as a family, as husband and wife, as brothers and sisters. Like all of it is so relatable, and you just watch it back, and because they're such lovable people, you could just watch it and watch it and watch it, and it's entertaining, and it's highly relatable.
So you also told me when we met the first time when we were talking that you basically learned programming because you want to do things on the edge of what is possible. And if there are no people around who can do it better, you just take over and you just teach yourself coding, which you did not do before. And suddenly you are the person basically building home automation. I could not believe actually that story, how you can switch from music to home automation and start teaching yourself programming, and your obsession that you want to do always good things and you want to perfectionize things. And this also translates basically in everything in your work.
Yeah, no, it's true. And that's when we look at the Osbournes as an example. Had I not trained myself to be a programmer and really dialed that in, I wouldn't have been able to put that system online. I know it sounds like almost basic and somewhat, crazy, but it's true because I needed to know that it was going to work 100% or better. And the only way to do that was to program it myself. And that's what originally got me into the programming, as you said. That's what did it. That there was the same idea, even though it wasn't for the Osbournes when I started. It was for the same type of client where, there was just constant disappointment in the results I was getting from programmers. I just couldn't stand it anymore. It really was. I couldn't sleep. It was the programming was just so half-baked, and it just didn't seem like anybody cared, and I cared. And so I just was so frustrated by it. I said, I got to do this myself, and I've got to make sure that this thing gets to the finish line every time, and that the programming is solid, and just no more excuses. I just found a lot of programmers I met. I'm not saying this is all of them, because obviously it isn't, but there were a lot of programmers I met at that time that were just filled with excuses. And I was just tired of it. So I just did it myself, and it worked. And the systems worked every time.
I saw you even won some awards, with systems.
Yeah. Won a lot of awards, which was great. I mean, we didn't do it for the awards, but it was nice that we got the awards. We got the recognition that these systems were exceptional. They were very, very progressive and cutting edge, and they worked.
So you have basically this insane obsession for quality. What you did in music, you basically transformed this in a completely different area, which was like home automation, where also people needed good solutions. They had the money, but they wanted to have good home automation. At the time, there were also not good solutions. There were also a lot of frustrations. Technically, a lot of things possible, but they're not really innovating fast enough. Did you also drive some people crazy? For example, let's say with details, because you want to have the quality and they cannot deliver things you took notice, but they could not see.
Of course. I mean, I learned the hard way that a lot of people don't think like I do. When I thought they did, when I started building my first businesses, I just kind of assumed everybody did it my way, and, I could trust that that's how it would go. But then you learn very quickly that, some of my approaches are unique or very specialized in how the mindset is. And so, yeah, I had a lot of people that would go through my world and realize it wasn't for them. And sometimes you get there the hard way, and sometimes you're able to figure it out a lot quicker. But yeah, I mean, it's a blessing when I can find like-minded people, and I can find people that really buy into the approach and the philosophy. Because, at the end of the day, you can just use very simple terms to describe it. It's hard, right? It really is. It's the hard path that you're describing that I chose and that you choose, because I've gotten to know you, and we choose. And hard is something that people don't realize is the case with everything. So, my wife and I always say, choose your hard, right? Like, it's hard going to the gym, but it's hard being unhealthy. It's hard, being successful, but it's hard being broke, so there's not really the fallacy is, well, I can choose hard or I can choose easy. That's the fallacy. There is no easy. You can choose hard or you could choose harder. And so I've always taken what I'll consider the high road, which is the hard path, and want to really make things happen and get there and not take any shortcuts. And of course, in doing that, you meet a lot of people along the way that don't buy into that. And in a lot of cases, they get very frustrated. I've had, really jealous people. I've had people steal my clients. I've had all the things you would expect as you're on your journey and you're accomplishing big things. You meet people along the way that, all different types. And fortunately, some of them are great and have very, very high morals, and some of them aren't. And you have to learn big lessons from that and then apply those lessons, so you don't get burned again.
So I'm also getting told why I'm doing this kind of difficult project. And so I think if you want to do good things and want to innovate, there's no shortcut on this. You basically need to do the hard job, and you need to do it consequently. Only with this you can basically innovate.
Yeah, well, that's right.
What I can also see on your side, David, you're also mentoring other people. So you have a huge life experience you share with other people, and you're also a philanthropist. You went through a lot of hardship, but you also try to help also other people. For example, I saw, the charities you're doing. For example, you have this project. I'm mentioning because we need more people also in this area with charity, helping other people. So you're helping for some children in hospitals, like musicians on call. I like that project. Does it connect back right to you when you're a little boy, like at the hospital, and basically you also want to, you basically can see how children can be maybe positively influenced?
Well, for sure. I mean, you're referring to in my philanthropy, the different things I've done with IRE Foundation, Frangioni Foundation, Starlent,
Yes.
and Make-A-Wish, and Musicians on Call. And then Musicians
Mm,
on Call, what I got really, really into it, this is pre-pandemic. We would go, a singer and myself, so two of us would go room to room at hospitals 1 day a week, and for 3 hours typically. And there were always children's hospitals, mostly children's hospitals. And we would play like a minute of a song to just kind of lighten their day. That's what Musicians on Call does. That's what their charity is
mm.
bedside entertainment for relief. And so I did it for years, and it was great. It was incredible. I got to the point where, of course, once the pandemic hit, that stopped. But even a little before that, I had done it for years, and I just wasn't able to keep doing it due to my schedule. But I contributed a lot. I did it for many years, and it was great. And I had some great singers with me that helped. They did it too. We always did it together. I would bring an electronic drum pad on a stand, and I would bring it from room to room, and it had a speaker built into it. So the singer would sing, just in the room, and I would play the sounds through the pad. And sometimes the singer would have an acoustic guitar as well. And we would just go in and just play, sing some songs. And a lot of times the kids would they always asked for Frozen, right? Everybody loved Frozen, all the kids. It was so heartwarming. But to your point, it was very much like a full circle moment of every time walking into those rooms and seeing the kids. It had a lot of impact on me, and it really brought me back to my childhood and helped me even resolve it to some extent, just really kind of process it and feel it now as an adult, what those kids are going through. You never know what somebody is going through, no matter what you've been through. That everyone's feelings and thoughts are so personal. But I had an idea. I had a similar kind of wavelength of what, where that lands when you're scared and young, really young. So I just was always I always tried to do whatever we could to just go in there and, just relieve in that moment. I'm only in there for a couple of minutes, but in those couple of minutes, I just wanted to change their day, lessen the pain, just really make it a moment that could hopefully turn how they felt then and make a difference.
So, with children, it's really like that. I mean, you might think they maybe forget about it. It's really like the small moments they will never forget in their whole lives, and will also influence them in the rest of their lives. And therefore, this was also something as a project I really liked. And I saw also, your other projects you were doing. And then, of course, looking a little bit further, I could also see you were also author and historian. And on top of everything, you had also a best-selling book, which is called Crash. And it basically is a love letter to drums. And you got like legends like Carl Palmer and Eric Singer, who were contributing on the book. So what inspired you basically to become like historian, for this iconic instruments?
Well, there's actually 3 books, and fortunately they all were bestsellers. Clint Eastwood Icon and Clint Eastwood Icon Revised and Expanded Edition, which that second icon came out when Crash came out. They actually came out the same month, in 2018. And what inspired those books was the fact that I've been a collector, and that also is a derivative of my youth. When I wasn't losing myself in music and drumming, I was losing myself in collecting. Again, these are like self-isolated passions that I could just kind of partake in and as a kid. So I started collecting baseball cards, back in the 70s, and then just got really into it. I think you can see the common denominator in my life is kind of a go big or go home approach. I've always had that all or nothing view. I don't find the middle ground very often. I really either am not into it or I'm all into it. So collecting was another obsession. And I got really into it, and I became, as a result, you kind of gain expertise in the field because you're just so immersed in it and you learn all of the things. So pre 19, like kind of like T205, which is early 1900s to 1969. That's a period of baseball cards that have very specific, types of cards and different brands that released the cards and different stars that were on the cards. Honus Wagner, everybody knows the famous T206, and Babe Ruth from 1933, and Mickey Mantle's 1952 Topps, and all of these cards I got really into and started, just learning a lot about. And then that evolved to movie posters, because I used to go to the Saturday matinee, and I would ask the manager, who, get this, German manager named Mr. Gunn, Gunn. And Mr. Gunn, you can't make this stuff up. Mr. Gunn he really was endeared to me, because I would show up there and I'd have an eye patch on, and I kind of stood out a little bit, and I would be there every Saturday, because Saturday, one show a week, you could watch a movie for 25 cents, and we could afford that. And my parents knew how much I loved the movies, and we all loved the movies. So they would let me go to the matinee every Saturday, 25 cents, and see whatever movie was playing, which was like a third run movie. Like Star Wars came out in 1977, and it was the matinee in 1979, right? Like that was the kind of third run movie house it was. But that was fine. I got to see the movies, and I didn't know the difference. And so, I got to know the manager, because I would sit in the lobby and I'd look at all the posters, and I just loved them. I just thought they were so cool. And that was back then, that was your Netflix coming attractions. That's the way you knew what was coming, and told a lot of story. And I was very into it. So I would ask the manager, what do you do with the posters? And he said, we throw them out, or we send them back. And so I made a deal with him, and he would give me the posters when the run was done. And I started collecting, and you fast forward, 35 years, 40 years. And I had this great collection of Clint Eastwood posters. And I was, through my connections, was able, through a wonderful person named Diana Ahn, who worked at Warner Brothers across from Clint on the lot. She was able to get to Clint and tell him about this collection I had and this book idea I wanted to do. I got Raoul Goff to produce the book, basically, to publish it. So Diana Ahn and Justin Lee got me in touch with Clint, and then Raoul Goff, Insight Editions, who do all of the books for Warner and DC, Harry Potter, huge publishing company. They signed me for the book, and then Clint got involved, and we put together this incredible archive of my collection, and give all the money to charity. And so that was Clint Eastwood Icon and Clint Eastwood Icon Revised and Expanded, because what happened between Icon in 2009 and Revised and Expanded in 2018 is my collection grew, and Clint made more movies. So we just kind of added, like 100, 150 items to it, and re-released it, and both sold out, which was great. And, it was a labor of love. But so collecting, it's something I actually want to do a lot less of, believe it or not. But I did do it for a long time and love it. And now what I want to do is I want to do projects that are for collectors, as opposed to myself spending all the energy to collect. I've kind of taken it to another level now.
So to put that in numbers, is it true that it's like more than 10,000 pieces you collected from Clint Eastwood?
At one point it was, yeah.
You can actually build a whole museum out of this.
Well, I had a museum for 10 years.
Whoa.
That's where you see all the videos on YouTube, the drum museum and all of the other items, the props and that kind of thing. We never even displayed the posters there, believe it or not. We never even got to the posters for the 10 years. We just focused it on drums and instruments. But it was quite something, and we had a lot of great memories. We have a lot of great videos we put up on YouTube of the drum sets themselves, because they're all stage played, artist owned. And we would have famous drummers come to the museum. This is before even that I was CEO of Modern Drummer, is that we had all of these drummers come, and they would play the kits, and it was something.
So, David, what connects the drummer, the tech nerds, and the Clint Eastwood fan together?
Me. And I found that a lot of people are one or all of them as well. So fortunately, at least one of them. But in some cases, there's a lot of drummers that collect. And of course, they're all passionate about drumming. And a lot of drummers are passionate about technology. And a lot of non-drummers are passionate about technology. So it really unifies, these different lanes and disciplines.
So you have basically this life motto. Once you get to the top of the one mountain, then you see basically the bottom of the another one. So it perfectly describes you.
Yes.
What's next? What is the next mountain you're getting ready to climb. Is there something you have in mind?
There's several, but AI is top of mind. That is an absolute. You want to talk about endless pursuit of possibilities. You're talking about AI in its furthest form. I mean, when we look at the internet and what's evolved, we now realize that connectivity is the basis of a highway, if we want to look at it that way. And AI are the supercharged vehicles that are going to travel on that highway and connect everything and everyone and all of the possibilities utilizing the highway. So it's all happening in perfect order, right? We had no internet and we had no highway. Then the internet comes along and we have the highway and we have connectivity. Then social media evolves and now we have interactivity using that highway. And now AI is coming along and it's going to supercharge the possibilities of how we can bring so much utility and so much power and possibility to everything. I mean, it's just, it's, you guys both know as well as anybody that it's the possibilities are truly endless. So that's what's really got me intrigued and involved in consulting and being a part, like I was through all these other sea changes. They're all sea changes. When we look at MIDI, that was a sea change from pre-MIDI, where all of the different technologies were independent of each other. So it was nearly impossible to get all of the instruments to talk to one another, which was incredibly limiting from a creative standpoint. Then MIDI opens up this, again, a digital highway of all equipment can now talk to each other. Now we can have sequencers, we can have sample databases, we have all of these incredible things because we have the highway built, which is MIDI. Well, the internet is the worldwide version of what MIDI did for music instrument digital interfacing. And so as we go between MIDI and the internet, we had digital audio. First we had sampling, then we had hard disk playback and recording, 2 channels. Then we had 4 channels, 8 channels, 16 channels, 48. Now we have virtually unlimited hard disk recording and editing nonlinear. So all of these sea changes were, very significant. They all built upon the next sea change that made huge, massive impact forever, because they're always going to be embedded in the foundation of the next tech. And that's where we are with AI right now.
So, David, I think we cover a lot of questions during this session. One of our last question, David, I would say, if you could go back in time and find that 12 years old you playing his heart out on the drums in some Boston clubs, what would you tell him?
There'd be a lot of things I would tell him. You just want to make the best choices you can every step of the way. And you want to stay very focused and very clear headed. And so I think I would tell him to be very careful of every choice you make and be very deliberate and be very selective and believe all of what you see to a certain extent, but none of what you hear, so that you're always working from the most real place and you're seeing things for what they are more than what you want them to be until they actually become that. And so I think that would be some of the advice I would give my 12-year-old self that I wish someone had given me. But, the way you learn things and the way you develop and evolve is always in perfect order. Otherwise, it would have been different. So I don't have any regrets for that. And I just, take every day and just, take it as far as I can and just keep learning better ways to make every day, right? Because as you execute a better process and better learning and better implementation, your results get better much faster.
David, you helped so many legends to sound legendary. You elevated the music with the quality, and your greatest impact might be that you be very inspirational for many, many people, to follow their dreams, follow their passion, and work hard on it. No matter, where they start, there's always a way. They need to solve the problems. They need to go through it. There might be struggles, but at a certain point, they will master it, and they will basically gain happiness. They will achieve something, whatever it is, and then people will see and appreciate what they have done. I want to thank you for sharing your incredible story. When you told the story, I felt like I'm sitting right beside you. I'm right in the moment when you're telling it. So thank you for sharing it.
Well, thank you for inviting me today. we've talked a lot. So I hope that there's something to take from them that helps everyone in their life, just gain some insight, or as you said, know that if I can do it, anybody can do it, and that perseverance will win over talent every day of the week. And so, and if you can combine those two to any extent, then you can go even further. And I think that, hopefully everybody gets that from today, that anything's possible. And thank you for having me. And Cyril, Saref, it's great to see you guys.
Thank you so much, David.
All right. Thank you guys. Bye, everybody.